Violence doesn't begin in the moment it happens.
That is part of the harm communities are trying to address, not just the kind of community violence that young people might face, but also violence from the systems themselves.
It starts earlier, in the gaps, in the moments we don't see.
And when you think about austerity, you think about all the different issues around education, lack of employment, this just became a melting pot of frustration.
And it doesn't happen in isolation. It's shaped by inequality, by systems that don't protect everyone equally.
She started defending the clothes she was wearing before she even got into the story, which shows you how baked in this idea of a black person wearing black clothes is a criminal.
Unpacked. Young People and Violence with me, Richie Brave.
There's enough work to show that stop and search doesn't have an appreciable impact on crime rates.
I still, every time I see a police car near me, police van, I still get scared, I still stiffen up.
Hello and welcome. To start off, or to kick off, so to speak, we're talking about a myth that shapes who gets stopped by the police, who gets excluded from school, and who gets seen as dangerous before they've even said a word. So the idea that youth violence has a face, and in the UK, that face is too often imagined as young, black, male, and urban. But that idea didn't appear out of nowhere. It's been built through policy, media, history, environment, and a load of different things. The fact is, violence is not unique to black communities. It's important we identify that. It exists across the UK, and overall, crime rates are closely tied to deprivation, not race. So today I'm asking, who built this myth? And importantly, who pays the price? I'm Richie Brave, and today I'm joined by two people who have seen this from very different angles. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm joined by Kodge, who is a rapper, storyteller, and someone who's lived the realities that people often stereotype. And also Dr Becky Clarke, researcher and lecturer, working closely with young people and systems around youth justice. But before we start, let's listen to this.
First time I got stopped, I was 13. It was outside my house, just like in the alleyway outside my house. I think I was wearing like a black jacket and I was in my school uniform. So like my shoes were black and so were my trousers, but my shirt was open. So you could obviously like see my school tie and everything. But it was basically just three of them. It was three white men and there was a car parked in the car park, like a police van. And I was just walking. They came out and they just came up to me and put me up against a fence and just told me some BS about how they're invoking the certain Stop Rights Act or some crap like that. And that because I look suspicious. So they searched me and everything. And I just felt like a criminal. Like they didn't even ask me how old I was, if I was going to school, you know, like if I even lived there. They just told me I look suspicious and now they're going to search me. You know, I just felt, I just felt like a criminal. I just felt violated.
So that was Amy, a young black woman, speaking about her first experience of stop and search at the age of just 13. Becky, through your experience, through your research, is this common? Does this ring bells for you?
Sure, I mean, you know, what we see, what we hear. When I say research, knowledge is being produced everywhere. So we know that's community knowledge, but it's also official statistics, you know, whatever you want to call the evidence. What we know is that whether it's policing, stop and search, whether it's different types of punishments. So I do a lot of stuff around joint enterprise. These are distinct strategies of policing and punishment, and they play out for different people in very different ways. So it's not a random encounter. It's being shaped by, as you said yourself, Richie, by policies, but also by history. So, you know, for me, when we look at communities that get these sort of over-policing or distinct approaches around policing and punishment, I think there's something about like a collective memory in institutions like the police or in other spaces where, well, this is where the problem is and this is where we will go and kind of target that activity. There's enough work to show that stop and search doesn't have an appreciable impact on crime rates. There's enough evidence to show how discriminatory and disproportionate it is in its application. Yet we don't see changes in how it's applied. So Amy's story, sadly, yeah, you could have probably written it 40 years ago and in 2026.
So hearing Amy's experience, understanding the context that Becky provided to us, does this ring familiar to you as well in your community?
I mean, do you know what one of the first things I noticed was when we were listening to the clip is that she started defending the clothes she was wearing before she even got into the story, which shows you how baked in this idea of a black person wearing black clothes is a criminal, right? Like, do you understand what I mean? She's 13 and she's already thinking about, I might be being perceived in this way. I think that, I come from Liverpool, right? Liverpool's policing are notoriously bad. This to me is like, it rings truer than you could imagine. Do you know what I mean? From a young age, we had to become so aware of how we'd be perceived on the off. Not even getting up to no good, really, just getting about with the footy and that. Do you know what I mean? That it is traumatic because it shapes. You're growing and you're learning and your brain's forming these neural connections. And now I've been legit for 5 years. The last time I was in court, right, they told me, all right, you're all good because you haven't offended since 2020, right? I still, every time I see a police car near me, police van, I still get scared. I still stiffen up, right? And, that's not all on me. Do you understand? So, yeah, it does. It rings true to me heavy.
What is you speak about stiffening up. What is that feeling that happens for you? So I heard the physical reaction, but how do you feel?
I mean, your heart starts racing, your palms get sweaty, I feel sick in my stomach. And, and I can be going somewhere. Sometimes I'm on my way to a show. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm getting in the mind frame of making people have a good time, expressing myself, doing what I love. Do you know what I mean? Doing what I live for. And, like, you get thrown to a place of, like severe fear. Do you know what I mean? And I think, like, it can be hard to sort of shake yourself back into the room. Do you know what I mean? I find that pretty difficult, and I don't think, in my experience, like, I don't find the way the police handle me helps that at all. Now, I'm aware that we need police, in society. We need some kind of law and order. But there's already friction between the community and the law. And by running it the way they run it, it's like a melting pot waiting to explode.
If the evidence is saying, look, stop and search isn't helping people, it isn't protecting people, why do you think we keep seeing so many examples? Why is Amy's experience relevant now and relevant 40 years ago, do you think?
Well, I think that idea that we respond to this notion of crime, what we assume to be crime, who we assume to be criminal, and that process, like I say, for me, I'd call it criminalisation, because then that accounts for how young people are being spoken about in school, maybe records that are being put on social services documents, maybe, and that encounter in the street. All of it is kind of gathering together to make assumptions about where the problems are, where crime is. So, I mean, we could get into, well, at certain times we see spikes or we see more money put into certain types of policing in certain communities. Well, let's think about, when does that happen and why does that happen? Well, we can see those moments are sometimes got nothing to do with crime. They're to do with political sound bites, When it's election time and there's a manifesto, that's when we hear about halving knife crime and a new policing strategy that's going to go in this community or that one. Or like we saw, a lot of my research that I might speak to today really stemmed from what happened after communities rose up or had riots or disturbances, whatever we want to call them, in 2011. And in that moment was the moment when the problem gets fixed and defined in a certain way, the policy, the money drives into communities, and for me that's the moment we've got to call it out and start disrupting it as well.
If you look back at the Toxteth riots, right, that was like a race related issue, but a lot of the racism came from the police as well, not just the community.
In what forms, and what did it look like when you're saying it came from the police? So people who aren't familiar with the Toxteth riot.
Police brutality,
right?
The targeting of black people anyway, and that's been happening since the 70s. And probably beyond that, but they changed the SUS law in the 70s, which meant that the police could basically stop and search anybody who they felt like.
Because that mugging stuff, the whole like, be careful, don't get mugged by.
Yeah.
So black people were positioned in a particular way.
Yeah,
Seen
absolutely.
as threats, it sounds like.
And then what happens is, the more they target black and ethnic minority groups, the more they get results that suggest the stereotypes correct.
I want to bring in a fact here, actually. So when it comes to stop and search, it's probably a good time to read this. A new study commissioned by the London Mayor Sadiq Khan's office found that black people are 48 times more likely than white people to be stopped and searched by police in some of London's best off areas. And I can imagine this isn't just confined to London. Black people are significantly more likely to be stopped and searched in the UK than white people generally. That is a fact. I guess if we talk about youth violence, right, and we understand that it isn't something that's specific to black children, right, is something that happens across the board. Why is the way it's policed, explained and represented so unequal? It is unequal. When you think about youth violence, the picture that a lot of people get in their head is a black child. It's black children being violent towards each other. When you look at policing, I mean, black children are more times likely, or black people are more times likely to be policed. I mean, what is happening here, Becky, do you think?
I mean, for me, and it's like you start with the stop and search, and that's just wild, 48 times more. I mean, you can't even, right? It's huge. Yeah. But then, that criminalisation process travels to a point where we're now at a point where children and young people, over half of children and young people who are in custody, whether that's youth custody or young offenders now, are from black or racialised communities. So, that's that opening gate, isn't it? That stop and search process that travels them through the courts, through into those forms of punishment. And so, yeah, absolutely. We have to challenge that. For myself and my colleague Patrick Williams, who I did a lot of my work with 10 years ago, we had to prove that point that youth violence was endemic across, in our case, Manchester. Because after the disturbances in 2011, they wanted to pump a load of money into Manchester, but they were going to put it through the police and target those black and racialised communities in South Manchester. And it was like, but if you're doing that, if actually youth violence is across the whole city, how are we actually responding to the problem of violence? And so, the first project we did in Manchester, and we mirrored it in London, we demonstrated that actually these two things are being conflated, and it's not the same thing. If you want to address youth violence, then you have to work in all communities, whether it's sus laws of the 70s or gangs policing that we've seen over the last 20 years in some of our major cities. It's just accelerated that bringing in to the web of the system lots and lots of young people, and some of those young people have done harmful things, but lots of them young people haven't as well. They're getting convicted of crimes because of who it's assumed they are or their associations to other people. It's like this idea of who's to blame is allowed to sort of spread out beyond even the individual now, and young people are being held responsible for what their friends have done, or sometimes for what, and this is from a case, a lad that he's in the dock with another guy, they play Sunday League football together, but they're on a murder charge together, and how that net has widened. And yeah, it starts with stop and search, but too many young people on life sentences for crimes that they haven't committed, and that's that process of being criminalised.
Let's be real, crime a lot of the time is a class issue more than anything. And I feel like the gap between the middle and upper and the working class and poverty-stricken homes is just getting bigger and bigger, and the amount of activity for young people and environments for them to do that is getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
They're taking away footy fields and putting apartments there. Yeah. Not to say that if there's nothing to do, then go and rob the old woman down the street. Absolutely not. But when you're hungry and scared and have nothing to do, these things are more likely to happen, in my opinion.
Would that ring true in your research? Is this endemic of, societal and class imbalances?
Yeah, definitely. That idea that young people are being failed, and that is about deprivation, that is about a lack of resources, a lack of protection, a lack of care and love for young people in community, and where that's supposed to come from. But then I would say that, if we start then looking inside the system, that process of racialisation is really significant. Like that idea that the fear of somebody or what we view dangerousness as or violence and how that is so deeply racialised, that's how we get all those young people travelling along that process and ending up in prison, because that judgment of young people from black and racialised communities as being problematic or more violent or has a function to play in the courtroom. It's something that the prosecution can use to tell the story to the jury, can signal without evidence of who did what and where, and some really grainy, crappy CCTV where you can't work out who's who or whatever. Well, then you need to be able to tell the story to the jury, right? You need to be able to say, well, why would these people be collectively responsible for the harm of this other young person? And that relies on those racialised notions, not just class notions, but, deeply racialised.
Are you saying that prosecutors lean into societal racism in order to paint a particular picture of a defendant?
Of course they do. It's a resource in the courtroom. If you want to signal to somebody in that jury or in the wider media or whatever what's going on here, you tap into those stories. We've had too many of them in Manchester and so many in London in the Old Bailey, where all young people in the dock are black. If I tell a story about the gangs and youth violence, then that is a short-handed way to signal to the jury what's happened here.
The work's already done, isn't it?
Yeah, so the consequences for young people of these notions of fear and guilt and who's to be viewed as risky are so devastating in that courtroom. And it works the flip way for young people who are white. We had a case in Manchester where the defence can say, he was playing at being a gangster.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't actually in a gang.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, the jury can kind of connect to that. Oh, of course he's playing because he's white.
I find even like criminality as a whole, if it's white criminality, it's glamorised. So if you think about the mafia, everybody loves that stuff, right? But if it's black people committing crime, they're barbaric. They're savages, they're animals. It's like that's the way it's been depicted for the longest time. And like, this is the things that I grew up on. Do you know what I mean? Like, I couldn't separate that when I was a young man. I'm watching that, and you glamorise this thing over here, but then that thing over there is like, oh no, you don't want to get caught up in that. It's the same thing.
Yeah. How do you think that's impacted on the way that you see yourself?
I mean, that's like how long have we got? Do you know what I mean?
About 45 minutes.
I think it's been difficult, especially growing up in Liverpool. I was raised by a white family. I went to a predominantly white primary school. And so it took me a while to even see myself as what I am, I was I saw myself as neutral in a weird way for a long, long time. It takes you longer to get in touch with yourself. I think when you're misrepresented, and then there's a lack of representation in all the environments that you end up in of you, you know what I mean? None of my teachers looked like me. No higher ups at the church looked like me. Not many people on my nan and granddad's campsite looked like me, if any at all, really. I don't remember any black kids on the campsite. So this is a thing where by the time I got to like teenagehood, that was when I longed for black connection then and started mixing with. But you're already behind in ways of culture, and then comes the thing where you feel like you have to prove yourself, right? So if you end up in the mix, the wrong mix, and now I feel like I've got a point to prove. That's where I think these issues, and you talk about the systemic racism, and when I talked about the class point before, it's like we're almost conditioned to go that route. And I think it comes back to what Amy was saying on that voice note. It's like from an early age, you're coached into feeling like you're a criminal. So then how long does it take for somebody to go, well, if they see me as a criminal anyway, what's the difference?
Something's really, like a few things that have stood out to me about what you said. Young people feeling like they've got something to prove. And I think when you go through puberty, whether you're a boy or a girl, there is that wanting to prove your identity, but also you speaking to your own identity. And this is something that I think a lot of black and racialized children will experience, that just finding yourself and not knowing yourself and all these messages about who and what people that look like you are. So in that kind of like not really knowing your identity and not knowing who you are, there's all these projections happening from society. I think, Becky, you spoke to it so well. Those things that prosecution can lean on because they're general understandings that exist in society. You as a black or racialized child are not going to be immune to that either. So all those projections that happen inside the courtroom are also being projected onto you at school, in your community, in your friendship groups. If you're around people who don't look like you, they may not necessarily know you, but they've got that to lean on to place you in a particular box. And I wonder what that does to children when they're attempting to find themselves. It may give them even more of a point to prove.
Absolutely, yeah. And you think about like sort of the media that you're exposed to at a young age, and I think like the media machine, the way it sort of pushes things. You know, Lupe Fiasco wasn't pushed on the radio and played to everybody when we were kids, but a lot of violence and a lot of profanity was. And that's not me having a shot at people people are just documenting what's really going on. But I just find the media machine pushes a thing that makes me feel like, okay, blackness is this, but it's not that. Do you understand what I mean? And that is so false. But how are we meant to know? You know, the amount of history that's been erased and the indoctrination's very, very real. And all these like, you know, from the minor encounters to the major encounters, and I don't really know where you'd place Amy's experience there with, you know, how far it is major or minor, but the fact of the matter is, there's millions of these interactions that we go through.
All the time.
Yeah. And you know, sometimes it's 5 a week. You know, sometimes it's more. That's a lot for a young person who's learning about the world.
Yeah.
And themselves.
And
as
themselves,
well.
that's what I'm saying, who they want to be, who they want to be seen as. And you know, like I say, you're watching the films and you're watching Rico and Ace, Boogie and all that, and you're going, oh, okay, this is it. That's not it.
We spoke a little bit about who you hang around with and who you're around with. And it's a question I wanted to ask you, Becky, because we spoke about joint enterprise a bit earlier on and how young people could probably get themselves caught up in things. They're trying to find themselves and moving with various different groups and get themselves caught up in situations that they never imagined they'd be caught up in. What is joint enterprise for anyone who's listening and maybe they don't understand it?
Sure. So joint enterprise is actually secondary liability is what it's called, and it's basically a way of extending the liability, the criminal blame from an individual who commits an act of harm, so usually it's used in this country for murder, and to say that there are a wider group of secondary people who are responsible for that as well. So we're really seeing it re-emerge here sort of 20 years ago. I got pulled in by a campaigning group that was set up by mums of people who've been convicted. So that's GEMBA, Joint Enterprise Not Guilty by Association. And they asked myself and Patrick Williams, my colleague, to come in and look at some accounts of like 250 prisoners all over the country who'd been convicted under joint enterprise. This is about 2014-15. Even though these people are all over the country and represent all these different court cases, it was shocking, the hallmarks of those narratives and how all these individuals had been convicted. I think I was saying to you before, Richie, you know, when you're watching a kid in the dock of an adult Crown Court, and we're talking 14, 15-year-old kids, and they can't even work out what the hell's going on in that courtroom, and their defence teams, it's Russian roulette whether they've got a decent one or not. Sadly, a young person might have died and their family wants answers and wants justice, but the system is hanging this group of kids out to dry on the basis that... And then you sit down and, you know, some of the mums will say, these might be the mums I've sat in rooms in the local community centre in Manchester with a mum whose son was murdered, who said, I've been asking the police and the social services for help for over a year. I wanted a move, they wouldn't give us one. Or you've got the young peoples who've been convicted, their families saying, we've been asking for help, and the system's never to blame. What it did or didn't do is never to blame, but the young kids are in this moment where what you're expecting them to know whether to run away, or I mean, in the legal language, they're meant to signal a version of withdrawal that, I mean, even, I think it's not just kids, adults as well. Like, it's just not possible. And that's why I just struggle, you know, in some youth work that's happening. I get it. I'm like, oh, let's go in schools and let's tell young people to be careful of joint enterprise and be careful of who their friends are and be careful what they say on text. And I'm like, this is crazy. Like, how are we putting it on young people? It
becomes even more divisive
to navigate.
Between each other, right?
Yeah,
what does that
community.
divisiveness look like? When you're saying divisive, what do you mean? Because I can hear you both agreeing. For people who don't experience it.
Because as a community, we should hold one another accountable to our actions, right? But if you catch somebody out, for example, acting in a way that's inappropriate, that we all know we should call out, but you just run away from them and go, that's nothing to do with me, I don't want to get... Nothing's going to change. This cycle's going to keep on repeating and keep on repeating.
It just made me think then, there's often no place for young people and families who are caught up in a moment to take accountability. You know, look at kids are then going into police stations and the legal teams are telling them, say no comment. That silence is actually going to be a massive problem down the line when you get into the courtroom.
I find as well, like, when you're in that interview room, the police will say anything to you to try and get something out of you, which I also find...
When you say anything, what do you mean?
So, like, they will try to brainwash you into thinking about how your family are going to react, or tell you that they can charge you with something more severe than they can actually charge you with, to scare you into saying something else, right? Which I think is just unhelpful in this thing what you're talking about, where if we could be tried properly and real justice could be served, maybe the whole thing would be different. But when you've got the person in power lying and goading and basically trying to push you into a situation further than the situation you're already in, I think that's so wrong. They're the one in the power position. They are the law. Why is the law lying? I've never understood that.
Because it can't do what it promises it's going to do for people. I think there's some of that as well. Like we see in some of these cases, I think the charging, especially using joint enterprise or the interviewing and stuff, these police investigation tactics are because they don't know who's done it or they can't get to the answer for it. And I think sometimes it's even about, let's just gather up as many people as can and see what sticks, or let's see who might turn prosecution witness, or maybe we'll get a guilty plea out of somebody. I've done work around women in joint enterprise, and, you know, some of those women, it's their partner who is being charged with them. And the woman's almost like the Achilles heel, let's charge her. Or it might be about charging friends. Well, you know, if you tell us what happened, we'll let your partner go, we'll let your friend go. And this is...
It's almost like bargaining.
Yeah, absolutely. And that process is, well, you use the word, Codge, divisive, and it really is, you know.
I wanted to ask, because we spoke about, and this leans into this actually, because we're talking about policing now, but you spoke a bit earlier on around what prosecutors can lean into. How does policing specifically shape who ends up being seen as dangerous? Because we've got the societal things that exist, right? So like we look at society and there's a lot of messages around particular groups. How does the way police particular communities lean into or shape the way certain people are seen as violent and some people aren't?
I mean, I suppose one of the ones we haven't really touched on at the minute is like how the police and the Crown Prosecution Service and others kind of get to be the definers of what's happened with the media too often. So, you know, when I'm doing the research, one of the things I will do is I will look at, well, what was the media reporting on the case? And you literally just get, it's like an echo chamber. And again, because I've sat through a number of trials, and you are literally, the media is just reproducing what maybe a police officer who's been invited as a prosecution expert witness put on the stand. Like, they are literally playing a narrative out together. Then the media is then replaying that narrative to the point where, you know, then the community and sometimes even people who might have known these young people start to think, oh, right, okay, so that's what happened then, you know. And the level of misinformation that starts, and, you know, you think, obviously, God, yourself from Liverpool, you think of Hillsborough, don't you, how that institutional definition of what happened, how powerful it is when it gets stuck. You know, 30 odd years, families had to campaign to challenge that narrative.
That's some people's lifetime.
Yeah, and that misinformation. Years. I really remember a beautiful moment, of campaigning and resistance collectively in community, and we were invited to do some stuff for the Manchester International Festival as part of the closing ceremony. And a lot of the families whose kids had been convicted were there, and I didn't know they were going to do it, but the crew had been working with on the festival in lights on the side of a massive cultural building in Manchester called Home. This side of this massive car park and building, they beamed up in lights, our boys are not in gangs. And that was the quote from one of the mums. Now, that mum had just a few months previously seen the Manchester Evening News, day in, day out, publishing pictures of her kids and reporting from that courtroom that her son was a gang member.
Well, that's that joint enterprise thing though, isn't it? Because as soon as they go, right, these are the 4 kids we're looking at, they give that a name. And that's like the gang that then the police have put them in now. But then when it gets reported, like you're saying, it gets reported from the police's perspective, not from the realistic perspective, or not from, you know, the people who are involved perspective. And I think the optics of it, like, even I've found the way I get handled by the police, like physically, if they stop me compared to my white friends, it's a little bit different. And so I think even just for passers-by driving past, to see, so if you're looking at a group of officers handling a young black man compared to a group of officers handling a young white man, or lack of handling them, that keeps that seed growing.
I'm interested in this seed, and in terms of what we see, I think you've raised such a good point, and it leans into what you were saying.
Optics.
Yeah, because when we talk about optics, we cannot remove the media from the responsibility that they have in the way that they present particular communities. When you see crimes committed by white people involved in other communities, often you hear terms like mental health, having a difficult time, etc. When you see, you know, black defendants depicted or presented, it's gangs and danger and violence
and black,
yeah, and also
in the headline as well.
Yeah, and like, and just to reinforce that as well, I mean, you know, research here shows that if you are a black suspect, you are more likely to be named and pictured in crime reporting than your white counterparts.
Rather than being
So
protected.
when you think about vision, what you see, right, what the media does, the imagery that you're seeing as well, I mean, what do you think it does to constantly see people who look like yourself pictured in the media in this particular way?
That becomes the story, doesn't it? So if it becomes the lens you're looking through, I think. Let's use the football, for example, right? You see the same guy every week scoring a goal. When you talk about him, he's a goal scorer, right? You see Virgil van Dijk heading it out every time. You call him a brick, right? So if when you're on the news...
Or something else. Sorry.
If you, every time you're on the news, you see black people being depicted as criminals, and let's be real, the shots they use as well, even if it's a black victim who was murdered,
sometimes it's mug shots.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm yet to see that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I'm yet to see that the other way around. Yeah. Right? I find that they use lovely, warm-looking pictures.
Family man.
Exactly. It's socially acceptable to completely generalise a whole demographic of people when that is not acceptable when it happens with other demographics of people.
And I think maths-wise, if you police them more, then they're more likely to be represented because they're more likely to be picked up.
Well,
100%.
absolutely. I mean, I'm going to give you a stat here, and it's one that I always use in the classroom with the students and stuff, like less than 10% of, I don't know if it's reported or recorded crime, so fact check me, especially my students, but less than 10% is prosecuted. So that just tells you, like, that's of reported and recorded. That's let alone all the stuff, all the harmful and the other events that are going on that never get brought into the top of that funnel. Do you know what I mean? So absolutely, Richie, you know what I mean? That the way in which we bring people into that, like, as if we imagine it as like a funnel of a system, is a big part of what we define as crime at the bottom.
How do you think this representation from a research perspective feeds into policy and public fear? When, you know, black boys, black girls are constantly being portrayed in this way that we've spoken about. How does it then transfer into the systems, the policy, the public fear? And then what does that public fear then do to those communities?
I increasingly think part of the problem is the policy. You can change the policy. I mean, there's a big consultation out at the minute around the CPS's gangs, evidence and group offending and the use of music and drill, right? They've got a open consultation on it. I've put my response back to it. But I also know that policy can get changed, and the change of the policy becomes the signal that they're doing something. But the practice doesn't change, because I also see that in that policy, or in, say, the joint enterprise policy, there's loads of parts of that policy where if it was being applied in the right way, loads of these young people I've seen in the dock would not be in the dock. there's something in what we've talked about, the way that these narratives and these strategies have so many different functions, political functions, media, commodification, capital function, you know, all different strategies that are almost too powerful for a policy to alone to shift it, you know. And I think so it's got to be all those strategies. I think challenging that misinformation even within the community that it's being applied to is key, so that people in community are not saying, oh, we want more police, or yeah, we need longer sentences for young people that have harmed. Let's really talk about that. Why? What's it achieving? In Manchester, we've seen literally square mile communities and families decimated, where young people have either been harmed by violence or been harmed by the system that's taken them away and punished them and locked them up. And that ripple for siblings, for parents, for cousins is just, it's huge.
There's something that you said that's really interesting to me, and I want to take a step back and speak to you about it, Kodj, because you spoke about music and drill, right? And quite often that the music that young people create is an escapism for all of that stuff that you're talking about. Those that battle that goes on within young people and their experiences. And I wanted to talk about the criminalization of black music as a rapper, you know, listening to what Becky said there around drill music and rap music, etc. Have you experienced that as a rapper when it comes to how black art forms have been criminalized?
I mean, back to me being from Liverpool.
Yeah,
right?
okay, talk to you.
So like indie band, right? And if you're an indie band, it's a great city to be coming out of, making black and urban music. Okay, it's getting a bit of shine now.
I mean, you're doing
yeah, I'm doing my thing. There's a few lads doing the thing, but I've been at this longer than 10 years, right? And I've seen how there are certain venues that it's like, not like I'm not allowed in, but it's like, well, it wouldn't suit our venue if you come and play your music here, right? And there's more of those venues than anything else. And I think the issue, and this is a wider issue than just music, but the issue that I get bogged down with is that by the time it starts changing, like the last 2 years, right, it feels like tokenism. By the time I get the opportunity, it feels like, okay, now you're ready to widen your target audience. So if you bring in black music acts, you can bring in black football. And it's almost as if I don't get to enjoy those moments. I feel the same about a lot of television, Hollywood type stuff. It's like, rather than being like, oh yes, like Black Panther, like a black focus superhero, it feels a bit like they just now want my coin as well.
It's interesting to me because I want to take it, you know, back in terms of the subject at hand, because I think this is all related, right? But the media benefiting off of this kind of stuff, benefiting off of, you know, black culture, but how black people are demonized in the media landscape. And I wanted to read a fact here. So in 2025, there was a police decision to reveal the ethnicity and nationality of suspects in high-profile cases, and racial justice campaigners, including Runnymede Trust, completely shut down that idea and warned against it. And this is what they stated, right? So this guidance, which encourages police forces to disclose the ethnicity and nationality of suspects charged in high-profile cases, is having a devastating impact on our country, harming our communities. The guidance was offered as an attempt to dispel misinformation. In practice, it has had the opposite effect, becoming a catalyst for crime reporting, reminiscent of the 1970s and 1980s, reviving a focus on race and migration status. I mean, we see that in society at the moment, but I also see it happening to relate it back to music. It's like, we want your money, but actually we don't want to support the thing that you're doing because you're seen as lumped in with this stuff. And it's interesting how the media can be a tool to progression and promotion, but it can also be a tool to reinforce some of those really harmful tropes. Do you think there's a false link happening between blackness and criminality as a result of what's being pushed by the media? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because I think now the visibility shows that there's plenty of black doctors, there's plenty of black lawyers, there's even black police officers, right? But there isn't enough of them. But I've been in court numerous times. I've never had a black judge. Now, of course, black judges will exist, but where are they?
Yeah.
You
But
know?
also by the time maybe they've got to that point in the system, They've had to also buy into a certain set of assumptions about the system, and, you know, that's part of the problem. And I think that like for me with the music, and, you know, when you look at it in prosecutions and stuff, it's often so tangential. But it works, you know, in that space, the idea that we can tell a story. So in a lot of our research, looking at the narratives of all these hundreds of prisoners who were convicted, you know, yet these sort of just cultural artifacts, you know, how you pose in a picture, what you wear, what music you listen to, all of these things are so embedded with a version of dangerousness.
So, Becky, are you saying using music is too easy because it places the blame on the community as opposed to the structures that the music is endemic of the experience? It is not the issue. I
just think it's so easy to. It's just the reach that is so easy to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that song. The lyric, that's why you're all.
The lyric, you know. Or even, I remember in a case where a prosecutor tried to say that the other young people, because they had their hands down the front of their trousers, that they were clearly knife-carrying young people. And I'm thinking, God, come in a university, come in a home, come in any space. But it's that, well, why would something that just seems so ridiculous and is such a reach, why does it just hit so sweetly? And because of this wider narrative that we've come here to talk about that is, you know, has such a big history and context to it. Do you know what I mean? It works.
What happens next? Because, you know, when we're reflecting on, I think we've spoken about how art forms have been demonised, how young black children and racialised children have been misrepresented, how that misrepresentation can be used as a weaponised when it comes to prosecution. We've spoken about feeling ostracised from communities, feeling outside, attempting to build your identity in a world or a society that criminalises your identity, tells you it's wrong. We've spoken about perception. What needs to change moving forward? If we're saying, okay, from a community perspective, we see that this thing is going on with our young children, we want to do something about it, taking all of this stuff into account, give me one thing that could be done to help approach this in a way that would make, you know, a proper impact. Is that $1 million question, Becky?
No, listen. Okay. and you know, I feel like there's so many great people doing amazing things, and we've got to do it collectively. So, you know, whether it's people from those directly affected communities, you know, the families of people that are going through these things in the immediate moment, or whether it's journalists, lawyers, and coming together, I think we've got to challenge the misinformation. Like, I really think back, and I think at how many times, once we had the evidence to say, no, in Manchester, London and Nottingham, serious youth violence is happening in all communities, you know, and actually you're policing gangs and you're policing a lot of people who actually have never even committed a crime over here, saying that you're addressing this issue and you're just really not. The amount of people, once we gave that information to, flew with it and were able to do what, challenge and disrupt. So challenging that misinformation. But then I think it's also about being really honest about and really exposing the harms that are being caused, you know, to young people and families, and trying to collectively move people to think about, well, what are my assumptions and how should I be challenging them? And, you know, and I think you started it at the top of the discussion, Cod, you know, that we take accountability and we hold each other to account for what we're saying and what we think.
I think the honesty in conversation is so huge. You know, when you do admit to a certain scenario that might be frequently happening within your community, it's then weaponized against you rather than you being commended for being able to be honest. And I think that whenever whenever I find myself in an environment where I can debate with people who can be honest with me and I can be honest with them, and we know it's out of love, actually we find that even if we have opposing views or ideals, by the time we get to the end of the conversation, we actually agree on most of the things we've been arguing about. But because of social media and, you know, my algorithm versus your algorithm, we build these beliefs and ideals, and then they become entrenched with our identity. And then we can't even have we can't even have an honest conversation.
Yeah, and I think it overlooks the harm, doesn't it? I think these conversations, it's like, this is fine for entertainment, but actually these communities need to pick up the pieces. Once you put your mic down, these communities are still picking up the pieces of what you've just discussed.
And we've got to find ways to get money into communities to do the right stuff, because part of the problem that I see as well is like people who know what some of the nuances and the issues are, but the only way to bring money into this project or that issue is to kind of nod along with the argument that's coming from the funder, or which is too often statutory funding and we'll gather that information on those families and young people. And no, we need to find ways to distribute, redistribute, extract wealth, however we get that resource into communities, so that people can also move with what they really know the issues to be, rather than feeling like we've just got to play the tune because it's been playing for so long and it's the only way to get the money. And I sit here and say that, and it's very easy for me to say that. I know some amazing folks who do great work, and sometimes it's hard to balance that book, as it were, and get funded and get resourced to work in the stuff that's not as easy.
And finally, Kodge, for you, somebody who's been directly impacted on this, you have hope for the future for young people. What do you think needs to change? What do communities need to be doing?
Coming together. It's funny, there's a story in the Quran, I'm going to butcher it here now, but there's a story in the Quran about these 5 men and a dog that go into a tavern and this event happens. And when people tell the story, they argue, no, there was only 3 men, there was no dog. No, there was a dog, but there was 4 men. No, it was 5 men and a dog. That doesn't matter. What the whole point of the story was what happened in the tavern. And I feel like that's what's going on among us. We're missing the point of what's really going on from the top down, and what needs to change, and how we need to see past our differences to come together, because who really gives?
Instead of doing that, imagine if we all punched up.
Exactly.
What a way.
And how many of us
and that's taken from the bloody Sunday Trust, I should say. I work with the folks in Derry. If you want to know some of the answers, go over there and chat to some of the folks over in Northern Ireland. Yeah, punch up.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you both so much for joining me today. It's been such a fruitful conversation.
I enjoyed it, thank you.
And also, I want to thank you for joining us on the conversation today. I've been joined by Dr Becky Clarke, and I've been joined by Kodge. If you've enjoyed the conversation, make sure you subscribe to hear more of this information, more of these episodes. And this is a reduced listening production for the Runnymede Trust.